On the morning of March 15, 1889, the staff at the exclusive Belmont Hotel in Newport, Rhode Island, discovered something that would haunt the city's elite for decades to come. Room 137, reserved indefinitely for one of America's most celebrated socialites, stood empty, its silk curtains still drawn, the champagne glasses from the previous evening's private gathering still untouched on the marble table, and a half-written letter bearing no signature abandoned on the East Crow. Isabella Fairmont, the woman who had once commanded the attention of presidents and princes, had simply vanished into the March fog, leaving behind only the faint scent of French perfume and a mystery that authorities would spend the next 40 years trying to solve. What they discovered in their investigation would shake the foundations of high society and reveal secrets so damaging that 3 prominent families paid handsomely to have the police records sealed. Before we continue with the story of Isabella Fairmont and the web of lies that led to her disappearance, I want you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because stories like this one, stories they tried to bury, are exactly what we uncover here. And leave a comment telling me what state you're listening from, because Isabella's story connects to dark secrets that may have reached far beyond Rhode Island's gilded mansions. But to understand why Isabella Fairmont's disappearance sent shockwaves through America's most powerful circles, we must first journey back to where it all began. In 1881, Newport society revolved around summer mansions that cost more to build than entire towns. The Gilded Age had created a new aristocracy of railroad barons, steel magnates, and shipping dynasties, and no hair was their wealth more ostentatiously displayed than along Newport's Bellevue Avenue. Among the citizens of industry and their carefully curated social circles, Isabella Fairmont reigned supreme. Born Isabella Catherine Aldridge in 1859, she possessed the rare combination of old Boston bloodline and new money that made her irresistible to Newport's social machinery. Her father, shipping magnate Cornelius Aldridge, had built his fortune moving goods along the eastern seaboard, while her mother claimed descent from one of the original Massachusetts Bay Colony families. This pedigree, combined with Isabella's striking beauty, raven black hair, piercing blue eyes, and a figure that made French couture weep with inspiration, had secured her position as the unofficial queen of summer society. Her marriage to Theodore Fairmont in 1878 had been the wedding of the decade. Theodore, heir to a Pennsylvania steel fortune, possessed the kind of serious, dependable nature that complemented Isel's vivacious spirit. Their Newport cottage, Rosecliff Manor, boasted 70 rooms, Italian marble imported at crushing expense, and gardens that required a staff of 20 to maintain. Isabella's summer parties became legendary, elaborate affairs where senators mingled with European nobility, where business deals worth millions were struck over champagne and caviar, and where a single invitation could secure one's place in society for life. The local newspapers couldn't get enough of her. The Newport Daily News ran a weekly column simply titled Mrs. Fairmont S Week, detailing her charitable endeavors, her fashion choices, and her guest lists. She patronized the arts with genuine enthusiasm, funding the construction of Newport's first proper theater and personally selecting the European musicians who performed at her soirees. Her influence extended beyond mere social gatherings. Railroad executives sought her opinion on business matters. Politicians courted her endorsement, and even President Chester Arthur had dined at her table during the summer of 1883. But beneath the glittering surface of Isabella's carefully orchestrated life, darker currents were already beginning to flow. The very social machinery that had elevated her to such heights operated on gossip, rumor, and the constant threat of scandal. In Newport's hermetically sealed world of inherent wealth and manufactured propriety, reputation was everything, and reputations, as Isabella would soon discover, could be destroyed with surgical precision. The first whispers began in the summer of 1884. During what society columnists would later call the season of shadows, it started innocuously enough. Isabella had been seen dining alone with Jonathan Pembroke, a dashing young architect who had been commissioned to designate additions to several Newport mansions. Pembroke, barely 30 and possessed of the kind of romantic intensity that made society matrons fan themselves. nervously, had arrived in Newport with impeccable credentials and a mysterious past that only enhanced his appeal. Jonathan Pembroke's rival in Newport had been orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign. His previous work, a Gothic revival mansion for a Pittsburgh steel baron and the restoration of a colonial estate in Virginia, demonstrated both artistic vision and practical skill. But it was his personal magnetism that truly set tongues wagging. Tall and lean, with dark hair that perpetually fell across his forehead, and intense green eyes that seemed to see straight through the elaborate pretenses of high society, Pembroke possessed something that Newport's usual array of suitable gentlemen lacked: danger. Isabella first encountered him during a committee meeting for the proposed expansion of Trinity Church. She had been reviewing architectural plans when Pembroke entered the room, and witnesses later recalled the electric moment when their eyes met across the Mahaganyinference table. What began as professional consultation quickly evolved into something far more personal and infinitely more perilous. Their relationship developed with the kind of reckless intensity that only occurs when two powerful personalities recognize kindred spirits in each other. Pembroke would arrive at Rosecliff Manor under the pretense of consulting on renovation plans, but he and Isabella would disappear for hours, walking through her meticulously maintained gardens or closeted together in her private study. The mansion staff, trained in discretion, but human nonetheless, began to notice things. The way Isabella Slaughter carried differently when Pembroke was present, the frequency of his visits, the letters that arrived bearing his distinctive handwriting. Theodore Fairmont, absorbed in his steel empire and trusting in his wife's social acumen, remained oblivious to the growing attachment. He approved of Pembroke's architectural work, and even praised Isabella for her excellent choice of contractor. This blindness would later torment him, but in the summer of 1884, Theodore saw only with wish to see his beautiful wife managing their social obligations with her customary grace and intelligence. But Newport society operated on a level of surveillance that would have impressed a European intelligence service. By August, the whispers had become murmurs, and by September, the murmurs had crystallized into certainty. Isabella Fairmont was having an affair. The evidence was circumstantial, but damning in the context of high society's unforgiving moral arithmetic. She had been observed entering Pembroke's temporary studio on Thames Street. They had been seen sharing intimate conversation at the casino, their heads bent together in a way that suggested secrets. Most damaging of all, Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt's personal maid claimed to have witnessed a passionate embrace between the two in the conservatory. At a private dinner party, the social machinery that had elevated Isabella now turned against her with mechanical precision. Invitations to exclusive gatherings began to arrive less frequently. Former friends adopted a cooler tone in their conversations. The careful choreography of Newport society, which had once revolved around Isabella's preferences and schedule, subtly reorganized itself to minimize her importance. Isabella, however, seemed almost oblivious to the changing climate. Friends later described her as being in a state of intoxication, not from alcohol, but from the kind of consuming passion that renders its victims incapable of rational thought. She continued to see Pembroke with increasing boldness, as if daring society to confront her directly. This defiance, which might have been admirable in other circumstances, only served to accelerate her fall from grace. The scandal broke publicly on October 12, 1884 in the most damaging way possible through the morning edition of the New York Herald. A society columnist known only as Observer published a detailed account of Isabella's affair. Under the head Lillingworth's Fallen Angel, the article, written with the kind of precise malice that suggested incidentalage, laid out the evidence of Isabella's relationship with Pembroke in devastating detail. But the Herald article contained information that shocked even Newport's gossip-ardent elite. According to the columnist, Pembroke was not merely an architect seeking romantic adventure with a bored socialite. He was, theoretical claimed, a man with substantial gambling debts and a history of relationships with wealthy women in other cities. The piece suggested that Isabella had been providing him with money, substantial sums drawn from her personal accounts, and that several valuable pieces from the Fairmont art collection had been quietly sold to cover his debts. the revelation hit Theodore Fairmont like a physical blow. His wife had not merely been unfaithful, she had potentially been swindled by a professional fortune hunter. The humiliation was compounded by the realization that his business associates, his social peers, and his domestic staff had all been aware of the situation while he remained in ignorance. The confrontation between Theodore and Isabella took place on the evening of October 13th in the library at Rosecliff Manor. At Rosecliff Manor, according to Theodore's later testimony to private investigators, Isabella initially denied the affair, but broke down when presented with bank records showing the money transfers. She admitted to the relationship, but insisted that her feelings for Pembroke were genuine and that she had given him money out of love, not manipulation. Theodore's response was swift and unforgiving. He demanded that Isabella end all contact with Pembroke immediately, return to Boston for the winter season, and submit to a period of social rehabilitation that would allow them to eventually restore their reputation. Isabella's refusal was equally immediate and absolute. She declared that she loved Pembroke, that her marriage had been a mistake, and that she intended to seek a divorce, a scandalous proposition that would have ruined both their social positions permanently. The household staff later reported hearing raised voices from the library until nearly midnight, followed by the sound of doors slamming and Isabella's footsteps on the marble staircase. When Theodore emerged the following morning, his face bore the hollow expression of a man who had aged a decade overnight. But Isabella's defiance came at a cost that extended far beyond social embarrassment. Theodore's investigation into their finances revealed that she had transferred nearly $50 to Pembroke over the course of 4 months, a sum equivalent to over $1 million in today's currency. More disturbing still were the discoveries made when Theodore's lawyers examined the sales of artwork and jewelry that Isabella had claimed were a routine updating of their collection. Several pieces, including a diamond necklace that had belonged to Theodore's mother, had been sold for significantly less than their appraised value, suggesting either poor judgment or deliberate deception. The final blow came when Theodore's private investigators tracked down Pembroke's previous addresses in Pittsburgh. They discovered that he had been involved with the wife of a prominent businessman, receiving substantial sums of money before disappearing. Suddenly, when the relationship was discovered in Richmond, a similar pattern had emerged with the widow of a tobacco fortune. The investigators' report painted a picture of a sophisticated confidence man who targeted lonely, wealthy women with surgical precision. When Theodore presented this evidence to Isabella, her reaction surprised even him. Rather than expressing shock or betrayal, she became defensive of Pembroke, insisting that his previous relationships had been different and that their love was genuine. This response convinced Theodore that his wife had fallen victim to a manipulation so complete that she could no longer distinguish between reality and the fantasy that Pembroke had constructed for her. By November 1884, Isabella Fairmont's position in Newport society had become untenable. The Herald article had been reprinted in newspapers across the country, transforming what might have been a local scandal into a national spectacle. The story had everything that readers craved: wealth, beauty, betrayal, and the downfall of someone they had been encouraged to both admire and resent. Theodore's ultimatum was simple and non-negotiable. Isabella must publicly renounce her relationship with Pembroke, submit to a year of virtual exile from society, and accept severe restrictions on her personal finances and social activities. In exchange, he would not pursue divorce proceedings and would gradually work to rehabilitate their reputation through charitable work and careful social engineering. Isabella's response was to disappear for 3 days. She was discovered by her personal maid on November 15th, staying under an assumed name at a modest boarding house in Providence. When confronted by Theodore and his lawyers, Isabella presented them with a proposal that was either desperate brilliance or complete madness. She would expose the entire network of social corruption that she claimed existed within Newport's elite circles. According to Isabella, her affair with Pembroke had provided her with access to information that could destroy several prominent families. She claimed that Pembroke, during their intimate conversations, had revealed details about his architecture alchemism that included hidden rooms, secret passages, and concealed safes in several Newport mansions. More damaging still, she alleged, Fafi's modifications had been requested by clients who were using them to hide evidence of illegal business practices, tax evasion, and other criminal activities. Isabella's threat was specific and terrifying in its implications. She claimed to have documentation proving that Senator William Blackstone had hidden evidence of bribery in a concealed compartment behind his library fireplace. She alleged that railroad magnate Charles Pianton was storing forged documents related to land acquisition in a secret room beneath his wine cellar. Most explosively, she insisted that she possessed evidence linking 3 Newport families to a conspiracy to manipulate steel prices during government contract negotiations. Theodore's lawyers were skeptical, but they were also terrified. In the high-glitter contact world of Gilded Age business, accusations of this magnitude could trigger investigations that might expose legitimate business practices that operated in legal gray areas. Even if Isabella's claims were false, the scandal of her making them publicly would be devastating to everyone involved. The meeting that took place on November 20th, 1884 in the private eating room of the Belmont Hotel included representatives from 5 of Newport's most powerful families. Isabella presented her demands with the cool precision of a seasoned negotiator: $100,000 in cash, Pembroke's debts to be quietly settled, and guaranteed safe passage for both of them to Europe, where they would remain permanently. In exchange, she would disappear from American society forever and take her allegations with her. The negotiation lasted 6 hours. By midnight, a deal had been struck, but with modifications that Isabella had not anticipated. The families would provide the money and ensure that Pembroke's debts were settled, but they insisted on additional conditions. Isabella and Pembroke would travel separately. They would not contact each other for at least 2 years, and they would both sign legally binding agreements never to return to the United States or communicate with any member of Newport society. Isabella agreed to the terms, but witnesses later reported that she seemed different during the final negotiations, distracted, almost dreamy, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. When asked if she understood the permanent nature of the exile she was accepting, she simply smiled and said that some sacrifice were worth making for love. The money was delivered to Isabella's hotel room on November 25, 1884. She was scheduled to depart for Europe on December 2nd, sailing from New York on the steamship Britannica. Pembroke had already left for England, departing 3 days earlier on a different vessel. Everything seemed arranged for what amounted to the most expensive love story in American social history. But Isabella Fairmont would never board the Britannica, and the mystery of what happened to her during those final 7 days would haunt Newport society for the rest of the century. Isabella's last week in America unfolded with the kind of meticulous planning that suggested either careful preparation or mounting desperation. She had checked out of her Providence boarding house and returned to Newport, taking a suite at the Belmont Hotel under her maiden name. The choice was symbolically appropriate. She was in effect reverting to her identity before marriage, before scandal, before the chain of events that had led to her exile. The hotel staff later reported that Mrs. Fairmont seemed remarkably calm during her stay. She took her meals in her room, received no visitors, and spent most of her time writing letters. The hotel's desk clerk, a young man named William Chen, who had immigrated from California's mining country, noted that she mailed at least a dozen letters during her stay, though he could not recall the addresses or recipients. On November 28th, Isabella made an unusual request. She asked the hotel concierge to arrange for a photographer to take a formal portrait. The photographer, Marcus Steinberg, who had recently opened a studio specializing in society portraits, later described the session as one of the strangest of his career. Isabella posed for nearly 2 hours, insisting on multiple photographs in different poses and lighting conditions. She paid in cash and requested that templates be developed immediately. Waiting in his studio while the images were processed, Steinberg's description of Isabella during the session was haunting. She was still a beautiful woman, but there was something in her eyes, a kind of fierce determination mixed with profound sadness. She kept adjusting her jewelry, particularly a ruby brooch that she said had belonged to her grandmother. When I suggested she might want to schedule another session after returning from Europe, she just smiled and said that wouldn't be necessary. The photographs, which surfaced decades later during the probate of Steinberg's estate, showed Isabella in formal attire, her dark hair perfectly arranged, her expression serene but somehow final. In several of the images, she appeared to be looking past the camera as if seeing something or someone that existed outside the photographer's studio. On December 1st, Isabella's behavior became even more unusual. She hired a carriage and spent the entire day visiting locations round Newport that had been significant in her social life. The casino where she had met so many important people, Trinity Church where she had been married, the Cliff Walk where she had strolled with visiting dignitaries. The carriage driver Thomas McGillicuddy later told police that Mrs. Fairmont seemed to be saying goodbye to each location, spending long minutes in silent contemplation at each stop. That evening, Isabella returned to the Belmont Hotel and requested that a late dinner be sent to her room. The hotel's night manager, Robert Sterling, personally delivered the meal and later reported that Isabella seemed agitated but determined. She had changed from her day dress into an elegant evening gown of deep blue silk, and her jewelry, including the ruby brooch from the photography session, caught Thelm's light as she moved about the room. She thanked me for the service during her stay, Sterling recalled, and gave me tip that was far too generous for the circumstances. When I protested, she said that generosity was one of the few privileges that money provided, and she wanted to exercise that privilege while she still could. The final confirmed sighting of Isabella Fairmont occurred at approximately 11:30 p.m. on December 1, 1889. Hotel night clerk William Chen saw her descending the main staircase dressed in a dark traveling coat and carrying a small leather valvel. She moved with purpose, but without haste, nodding politely to Chen as she crossed the lobby. When he asked if she needed assistance with transportation, she declined, saying that her arrangements had already been made. Chen watched through the hotel's front windows as Isabella walked out into the December night. A thick fog had rolled in from the harbor, and within moments her figure was swallowed by the gray-white mist that frequently enveloped Newport during winter evenings. It was the last time anyone would see Isabella Fairmont alive. When she failed to appear for her scheduled departure on the Britannique following morning, Theodore Fairmont contacted the police. The investigation that followed would uncover a web of secrets, lies, and unanswered questions that would perplex law enforcement for decades to come. The Newport Police Department had never handled a case quite like Isabella Fairmont's disappearance. Missing persons investigations in 1889 relied on witness testimony, physical evidence, and a kind of methodical detective work that was just beginning to emerge as a professional discipline. Chief Detective Samuel Harrison, a methodical man who had cut his teeth on waterfront crimes and domestic disputes, approached Isabel's case with the systematic thoroughness that would define police work. For the next century, the first phase of the investigation focused on Isabella's movements during her final week in Newport. Harrison's team interviewed hotel staff, carriage drivers, shopkeepers, and anyone else who might have encountered her. Waitmerge was a picture of a woman who seemed to be methodically closing the chapters of her life, as if preparing for a journey from which he did not expect to return. The contents of Isabella's hotel room provided the first major clues. Her clothing and personal effects were neatly arranged, suggesting either hasty departure or careful preparation. More intriguing was what was missing: several pieces of valuable jewelry, including a diamond bracelet that hotel staff had seen her wearing earlier in the week, were nowhere to be found. Her personal papers included drafts of letters that appeared to be final messages to family members. Completed versions were never located. Most puzzling was a partially burned document found in the room's fireplace. The fragments that survived flames contained what appeared to be financial calculations and several names, including J.P., presumably Jonathan Pembroke, and W.B. The latter initially mystified investigators until they realized it likely referred to William Blackstone, the senator whom Isabella had allegedly threatened to expose. Detective Harrison's investigation took a dramatic turn when he attempted to contact Jonathan Pembroke in London. The address that Isabella's lawyers had been given proved to be a mail forwarding service, and Pembroke himself seemed to have vanished as completely as Isabella. British authorities, responding to Harrison's inquiry, reported that no one matching Pembroke's description had registered at any of London's major hotels or boarding houses. This discovery led Harrison to a disturbing conclusion. Either Pembroke had been using a false identity, or he had never actually left for Europe at all. The steamship records confirmed that someone named Jonathan Pembroke had booked a passage to London, but the shipping line's manifest showed that the passenger had never boarded the vessel. As Harrison dug deeper into Pembroke's background, a more sinister picture began to emerge. The architect's credulosities, while impressive, were difficult to verify completely. His previous work in Pittsburgh and Richmond was real, but investigators discovered that he had left both cities under questionable circumstances, abandoning projects and leaving unpaid debts. More disturbing was the pattern of relationships with wealthy women that had marked his career in each location. But the most shocking discovery came when Harrison's team examined the architectural modifications that Pembroke had made to several Newport mansions. Working with local building inspectors, they confirmed that at least 3 houses contained the kind of hidden compartments and secret passages that Isabella had described. However, these modifications had been completed months before Isabella's affair with Pembroke became public knowledge, suggesting that his relationship with her might have been planned from the beginning. The investigation's focus shifted when Harrison received an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Margaret Winthrop, an elderly woman who had worked as a seamstress for several Newport families. Mrs. Winthrop claimed to have information about Isabella's disappearance, but she insisted on speaking privately and demanded assurance that her identity would be protected. Mrs. Winthrop's story was both fascinating and terrifying. According to her account, she had been working late in the sewing room at the Peaton Mansion on the night of December 1st, when she heard voices from the main house. Curious about who might be visiting at such a late hour, she had positioned herself near a window that overlooked the mansion's rear courtyard. What she witnessed, she claimed, was a clandestine meeting between Isabella Fairmont and 2 men she did not recognize. The conversation appeared to be heated, with Isabella gesturing emphatically, while the men remained still and watchful. After approximately 20 minutes, one of the men handed Isabella what appeared to be a package or envelope, and she departed with them in a closed carriage. Mrs. Winthrop's account was both compelling and problematic. She could not provide detailed descriptions of Thetwell men, claiming that the lighting had been poor and her vantage point limited. Moreover, her reputation in Newport was somewhat questionable. She had been dismissed from previous positions for gossiping about her employer's private affairs. Harrison was inclined to dismiss her testimony until she provided a detail that only someone who had actually been present could have known. Isabella had been wearing the ruby brooch that the hotel staff had noticed, and it had caught the moonlight in a distinctive way. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Newport intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next in Isabella's final moments. The breakthrough in Detective Harrison's investigation came from an unexpected source: the financial records of the 5 Newport families who had negotiated Isabella's exile agreement, working with a federal investigator who specialized in financial crimes. Harrison discovered a series of money transfers that painted a disturbing picture of the events leading up to Isabella's disappearance. The $100 that was supposed to fund Isabella's European exile had been transferred to a New York bank, accounted under the name I.C. Aldrich, Isabella's maiden name and initials. However, the account had never been accessed. The money remained untouched, suggesting that Isabella had never had the opportunity to claim it. More significantly, the account had been opened by someone using forged documents, and the handwriting on the banking papers did not match Isabella's distinctive script. This discovery led Harrison to a chilling conclusion. Someone had been impersonating Isabella during the final negotiations. or the entire exile agreement had been a elaborate deception designed to provide cover for more sinister plans. The investigation took on new urgency when Harrison discovered that Jonathan Pembroke had not disappeared. He had been found dead in a Boston boarding house on November 30th, the day before Sabella's disappearance. The cause of death was officially listed as heart failure, but the boarding housekeeper peeped that Pembroke had been visited by two well-dressed gentlemen on the day he died. The men had claimed to be business associates and had spent several hours with Pembroke in his room before departing quietly. Pembroke's death had been reported in Boston newspapers, but the story had not reached Newport until several days later. This timing suggested that Isabella might not have known about Pembroke's death when she made her final arrangements on December 1st. If she had been planning to meet him or join him in exile, she would have been walking into a trap. Harrison's investigation now focused on identifying the two men who had visited Pembroke in Boston and who Mrs. Winther claimed to have seen with Isabella on the night she disappeared. The breakthrough came when he discovered that several of the Newport families had employed the same private security firm, Pinkerton Detective Agency, to handle sensitive matters related to the Isabella scandal. The Pinkerton files, obtained through legal pressure applied by federal investigators, revealed the existence of what amounted to a conspiracy to permanently silence Isabella Fairmont. The record showed that agents had been tracking both Isabella and Pembroke for weeks, documenting their movements and monitoring their communications. Most damning were the strategic recommendations contained in the agency's reports, which suggested that the scandal posed such a significant threat to their clients' interests that permanent resolution might be necessary. The euphemistic language of the Pinkerton reports was chilling in its implications. References to neutralizing threat and ensuring permanent discretion suggested that the detective agency had moved beyond surveillance into more sinister territory. One report dated November 28 recommended immediate action to prevent exposure of client interests and noted that the target's emotional instability proves optimal cover for various outcomes. But the most shocking discovery came when Harrison examined the original architectural plans for the hidden compartments that Pembroke had built in Newport mansions. The plans included detailed specifications for a sophisticated hiding place beneath the wine cellar of the Piton mansion, a space large enough to conceal far more than documents or valuables. Working with federal investigators and local building inspectors, Harrison obtained a warrant to examine the Piton mansion's basement. What they discovered on February 14, 1890 would haunt everyone involved in the investigation for the rest of their lives. The search of the Piton mansion began at dawn on Valentine's Day 1890. Detective Harrison had assembled a team that included federal investigators, local police officers, and a building inspector who specialized in structural modifications. The mansion's current resident, Charles Piton, had departed for his New York residence immediately after the warrant was issued, had left behind a house that seemed frozen in time, its elegant rooms bearing witness to the kind of wealth and privilege that had defined Gilded Age Newport. The wine cellar, located beneath the mansion's main floor, appeared normal at first examination. Racks of imported wines lined the walls, and the stone floor showed no obvious signs of disturbance. But the building inspector's measurements revealed a discrepancy. The cellar's dimensions did not match the architectural plans on file with the city. There was approximately 8 feet of unaccounted space behind the north wall. Working carefully with picks and crowbars, the investigation team broke through what appeared to be a false wall constructed of the same stone as the cellar's original construction. Behind it lay a hidden chamber approximately 10 feet square and 8 feet high with walls that had been lined with lead sheeting, a modification that would have prevented any sounds from escaping to the rooms above. The chamber was not empty. Isabella Fairmont's remains were discovered in the far corner of the hidden room, her body wrapped in what had once been an expensive silk evening cloak. The ruby brooch that hotel staff and the photographer Marcus Steinberg had noticed was still pinned to the fabric, though the silk itself had deteriorated significantly during the 2 months she had been missing. The coroner's examination revealed that Isabella had died from chloral hydrate poisoning, a method that had become increasingly popular among professional killers. because it was difficult to detect and could be administered without the victim's knowledge. The poison had been mixed with champagne, traces of which were found in a crystal glass discovered near her body. But perhaps most chilling was the evidence that Isabella had not died immediately. Scratch marks on the lead-lined wall suggested that she had been conscious when placed in the chamber and had attempted to escape before the poison took full effect. A partially written note found clutched in her hand contained what appeared to be accusations against her killers, though the deteriorated paper made the text largely illegible. The discovery of Isabella's body transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into a murder inquiry of unprecedented complexity. The evidence suggested a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Newport society, involving families whose names were synonymous with American industrial poor. Detective Harrison's reconstruction of events painted a horrifying picture of premeditated murder, disguised as scandal management. The exile agreement had been a ruse designed to provide cover for Isabella's disappearance. The two men who had met with her on the night of December 1st had been Pinkerton agents, acting on behalf of the Newport families who feared exposure of their business crimes. Isabella had been lured to Thiepton Mansion with the promise of final arrangements for her departure to Europe. Instead, she had been drugged, imprisoned in the hidden chamber, and left to die. The lead lining that had been installed ostensibly to protect valuable documents had actually been designed to create a soundproof execution chamber. The investigation revealed that Jonathan Pembroke's death had also been murder disguised as natural causes. The architect had been killed because he possessed detailed knowledge of the hidden compartments and their contents, knowledge that would have made him a dangerous witness if Isabella's allegations had ever been investigated. His death had been carefully timed to precede Isabella's murder by 1 day, ensuring that she would have no opportunity to learn of his fate before walking into the trap that had been set for her. The arrests that followed Isabella's discovery sent shock waves through American high society that reverberated far beyond Newport's exclusive circles. Charles Peaton, William Blackton, and 3 other prominent Newport residents were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, while 2 Pinkerton agents faced charges of actual murder and concealment of evidence. But the legal proceedings that many expected to expose the full scope of the conspiracy never materialized. Within weeks of the arrests, a series of mysterious developments began to undermine the prosecution's case. Key witnesses, including Mrs. Margaret Winthrop, began to recant their testimony or claim that they had been mistaken in their observations. Evidence disappeared from police custody under circumstances that suggested official corruption. Most significantly, the Pinkerton detectives' files related to the case were destroyed in a suspicious fire that consumed the AY's Boston offices. The federal investigation, which had initially proceeded with great vigor, began to encounter bureaucratic obstacles that seemed designed to slow progress indefinitely. Jurisdictional disputes arose between local, state, and federal authorities. Key investigators were reassigned to other cases. Legal challenges to search warrants and arrest procedures consumed months of court time. By the summer of 1890, it became clear that forces far more powerful than the Newport Police Department were working to ensure that the full truth of Isabella Fairmont's murder would never be revealed. The wealthy familias involved had resources that extended into every level of government and law enforcement, and they were prepared to use those resources to protect themselves. The final blow to the investigation came when Theodore Fairmont, Isabella's widowed husband, announced that he was withdrawing his cooperation from the murder inquiry. In a statement released through his lawyers, Theodore declared that he had suffered enough tragedy and wished Tolo, his wife, to rest in peace. Without further sensationalism, behind this public statement lay a private agreement that investigators would later piece together. Through financial records, Theodore had been offered substantial compensation for his steel company's government contracts, along with guarantees of social rehabilitation and financial security. In exchange, he agreed to cease all cooperation with the murder investigation and to publicly support the theory that Isabella had died suicide after becoming despondent about her exile. The criminal cases against the Newport conspirators collapsed. In the fall of 1890, Charles Piton was acquitted on grounds of insufficient evidence. William Blackstone's case was dismissed on procedural grounds. The Pinkerton agents disappeared entirely, presumably relocated with new identities and financial compensation for their discretion. Isabella Fairmont was officially buried in the family plot at Newport's Island Cemetery. On October 15, 1890, the funeral was a private affair attended by fewer than 20 people. No society columnist covered the service, and no newspaper ran obituaries detailing her life or achievements. But the story of Isabella Fairmont's murder did not end with her burial, or the collapse of the criminal cases against their killers. In the years that followed, a different kind of justice began to manifest itself in ways that suggested the dead woman's accusations had been entirely accurate. The families who had orchestrated Isabella Fairmont's murder believed they had successfully buried their secrets along with her body, but the corruption and criminal activities that she had threatened to expose proved to be the seeds of their own destruction. Charles Pemberton, the man in whose basement Isabella had died, never recovered from the psychological trauma of the murder. Friends and family members reported that he became increasingly paranoid and reclusive, convinced that Isabella's ghost was haunting his mansion. He moved permanently to his New York residence, but found no peace there either. His business empire, built on the kind of fraudulent government contracts that Isabella had discovered, began to unravel when federal investigators, working independently of the Newport murder case, uncovered evidence of systematic bid rigging and price manipulation. By 1895, P&N Steel Company was facing bankruptcy and federal prosecution for fraud. The hidden documents that Isabella had threatened to expose were eventually discovered during asset seizure proceedings, confirming every allegation she had made. Piton himself died in 1897, found dead in his New York mansion under circumstances that suggested suicide. Though the official cause of death was listed as heart failure, Senator William Blackstone's political career suffered a similarly dramatic collapse. In 1892, a corruption investigation that had nothing to do with Isabella's murder uncovered the bribery, evidence that she had claimed was hidden behind his library fireplace. The documents discovered during a federal raid detailed a systematic scheme to self-sanate votes on railroad legislation. Blackstone was expelled from the Senate in disgrace and died in poverty in 1899, that his family fortune consumed by legal fees and restitution payments. The pattern repeated itself with each of the families who had participated in Isabella's murder. Railroad magnate Thomas Hartwell was ruined when the Interstate Commerce Commission discovered the price-fixing conspiracy that Isabella had threatened to expose. His suicide in 1896 was front-page news in newspapers across the country. Banking heir Robert Sterling lost his fortune in the panic of 1893, largely because his illegal lending practices, the same ones Isabella had discovered, left his institution vulnerable when the economy collapsed. But perhaps the most poetic justice came in the fate of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. The organization that had carried out Isabella's murder found itself under increasing federal scrutiny. Labor violence escalated throughout the 1890s. Congressional investigations into the agency's methods and clients revealed a pattern of corruption, illegal surveillance, and violence that destroyed its reputation permanently. By 1900, the Pinkerton Agency had lost most of its major clients and was facing criminal charges in multiple states. Detective Samuel Harrison, who had led the original investigation into Isabella's disappearance, never forgot the case that had defined his career. After retiring from the Newport Police Department in 1905, he spent his remaining years compiling a detailed record of everything he had discovered about the conspiracy. His private files, discovered after his death in 1918, contained evidence that several other mysterious deaths in Newport during the 1880s and 1890s had been connected to the same network of wealthy families and corrupt officials. Harrison's final report, written in 1917, concluded with a chilling assessment. The murder of Mrs. Isabella Fairmont was not an isolated crime, but part of a systematic campaign by America's wealthiest families to eliminate threats to their power through violence and intimidation. The failure to prosecute her killer sent a message that money and influence could place individuals above the law, a precedent that continues to corrupt our justice system to this day. The Isabella Fairmont case became a cautionary tale that was whispered about in Newport society for decades. Parents warned their daughters about the dangers of social climbing and extramarital affairs, but they missed the deeper lesson that Isabella's story provided, that America's Gilded Age elite were capable of murder when their interests were threatened. The mansion where Isabella died, the Peaton Estate, stood empty for over 20 years after Charles Peaton's death. Local residents reported strange occurrences, lights appearing in windows of the supposedly vacant house, sound-soft music and laughter carrying across the grounds during winter evenings, and the persistent scent of French perfume in rooms that had been sealed for decades. In 1920, the mansion was purchased by a Catholic charity and converted into an orphanage. But the building's troubled history continued. Children reported seeing the figure of an elegantly dressed woman walking through the corridors at night, and several staff members claimed to have heard the sound of someone scratching at the walls in the basement. The orphanage closed in 1935 after a series of mysterious accidents that the church deemed incompatible with the spiritual welfare of the children. The building was demolished in 1938, but construction workers reported finding additional hidden chambers that had not been discovered during the original police investigation. One chamber contained what appeared to be personal effects belonging to other missing persons from the 1880s and 1890s, suggesting that Isabella may not have been the only victim of Newport's elite conspiracy. The ruby brooch that Isabella had worn to her death became the subject of its own dark legend. After being held as evidence for several years, it was eventually returned to Theodore Fairmont, who immediately donated it to a Boston museum. The brooch disappeared from the museum's collection in 1895 under circumstances that suggested theft, but it surfaced periodically over the following decades, always associated with tragedy. In 1902, the brooch was discovered among the possessions of a New York socialite who had died in what appeared to be a suicide. In 1918, it was found in the jewelry box of a Philadelphia heiress who had died under mysterious circumstances. During the influenza pandemic, each time the brooch appeared, its owner suffered a fate that echoed Isabella's own tragic end. Theodore Fairmont never remarried. He lived quietly in Boston until his death in 1923, spending his final years engaged in philanthropic work focused on protecting women from domestic violence. His will included a substantial endowment for a foundation dedicated to investigating unsolved crimes against women, though he never publicly acknowledged the connection to his first wife's murder. The Fairmont Foundation, established after Theodore's death, quietly funded investigations into dozens of suspicious deaths involving wealthy families throughout New England. While the foundation never solved any cases as dramatic as Isabella's murder, it helped bring attention to a pattern of violence against women that had been systematically ignored by law enforcement agencies more concerned with protecting the powerful than seeking justice for the vulnerable. Perhaps the most enduring mystery surrounding Isabel Fairmont's death was not who killed her or why, but what became of the evidence she had gathered about the Newport conspiracy. Despite extensive searches of her hotel room, her personnel effects, and every location she had visited during her final week in Newport, investigators never found the documentation that she had claimed to possess. Detective Harrison's theory was that Isabella had hidden the evidence somewhere in Newport before her final meeting with the Pinkerton agents. He believed that she had suspected the danger she faced and had taken steps to ensure that her allegations would serve of her death. Harrison spent years searching for this hidden cache of documents, but he died without ever locating it. In 1954, renovations at the Belmont Hotel uncovered a sealed envelope hidden behind a loose brick in the basement storage area. The envelope marked with Isabella's initials and dated November 30th, 1889 contained what appeared to be the missing evidence, detailed financial records, correspondence between Newport families and corrupt officials, and architectural plans showing the locations of hidden compartments in over a dozen mansions. The discovery of Isabella's evidence 65 years after her death provided final confirmation of every allegation she had made. The documents revealed a conspiracy that extended far beyond Newport, involving politicians, judges, and business leaders throughout New England. But by 1954, all of the original conspirators were long dead, and the statute of limitations had expired on their crimes. The Belmont Hotel donated Isabella's evidence to the Newport Historical Society, where it remains today as part of a permanent exhibition on the darker aspects of Gilded Age society. Visitors to the exhibition often report feeling an unusual chill when viewing Isabella's final photographs and reading her final letters, as if her spirit remains present to ensure that her story is finally told in full. The hotel room where Isabella spent her final nights, room 137, was eventually converted to their uses, but staff and guests continued to report unusual phenomena. The scent of French perfume, the sound of a woman weeping, and the persistent feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. The hotel's management eventually removed the room number and converted the space to storage. But the strange occurrences continued. Dr. Margaret Steinberg, a historian who spent 20 years researching the Isabella Fairmont case, published the definitive account of the conspiracy in 1979. Her book, The Newport Murders, Wealth, Power, and Justice in Gilded Age America, became a bestseller and sparked renewed interest in the case. Dr. Steinberg's confirmed that Isabella's murder was part of a broader pattern of violence used by America's elite to protect their interests. Isabella Fairmont died because she threatened to expose the truth about how America's wealthiest families accumulated their power. Dr. Steinberg wrote in her conclusion, her murder was not a crime of passion, but a calculated business decision carried out by men who viewed human life as just another commodity to be bought, sold, or disposed of as circumstances required. The case continued to fascinate researchers and true crime enthusiasts well into the 21st century. In 2019, the FBI's Cold Case Unit announced that they were using modern forensic techniques to re-examine evidence from the Isabella Fairmont murder, though they acknowledged that the passage of time and the destruction of records made prosecution impossible. But for many who studied the case, the question of legal justice was less important than the broader lessons that Isabella's story provided about power, corruption, and the price of challenging entrenched interests. Her death became a symbol of the violence that America's elite were willing to employ to protect their privileges, and her story served as a warning about the dangers that await those who threaten to expose inconvenient truths. This mystery shows us that some secrets are so dangerous that powerful people will kill to protect them, and that justice delayed is often justice denied forever. The wealthy families who murdered Isabella Fairmont escaped legal punishment, but they could not escape the consequences of their crimes. One by one, they fell victim to the same forces of corruption and greed that they had used to destroy others. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? Or are there still secrets buried in Newport's exclusive mansions? Isabella Fairmont's courage in standing up to America's most powerful families cost her everything, but her sacrifice ensured that their crimes would eventually be exposed. Leave your comment below telling me what you think really happened during Isabella's final night in Newport. If you enjoyed this tale and want more stories about the dark secrets of America's elite, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves historical mysteries. The truth has a way of surfacing even when powerful people try to bury it forever. See you in the next video.